Australia is facing international shame over its housing affordability crisis. A damning new report confirms that Australia has the worst housing affordability in the entire developed world. How much worse does it have to get before real decisive action is taken? Or are we happy to continue down this greed-fueled housing path that's completely destroying the fabric of Australian society? I'm Biko Konstantinos, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I recently moved house and the question has to be asked, are my neighbours happy that I brought my didgeridoo? No. Whoa, 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 whoa. But I actually did move house and it's bloody stressful. But you know what's even more stressful? Being made homeless due to crazy policies that incentivize speculation into housing. And that's what's happening across Australia and many countries around the world. So I'm here to keep you up to date on all the big stuff that affects your lives. So give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already, because you've got absolutely nothing to lose. Except maybe your time and your sanity. Now let's see why Australia continues to be globally shamed in regards to our ridiculous housing market. Today we're going to focus on the Demographia International Housing Affordability Report 2024 edition. This report, which compares housing affordability across the developed world, has now been running for 2 decades, and according to the authors is more critical now than ever as housing inflation has grown across the world. Or in other words, house prices have gone batshit crazy, especially in countries like Australia and Canada. The first step towards finding resolutions is providing the facts for people to analyze. But then you've got the hard part of convincing policymakers to change direction before new generations lose all hope of home ownership. Now in Australia, policymakers on average own way more property than the average Australian. Now just try convincing them to do anything that might reduce the overall value of their property portfolios. You've probably got more chance winning the lotto when you haven't even bought a ticket. The authors are right in saying that housing now is one of the biggest expenses for the middle class, and that's why as housing costs increase, millions of people in Australia and around the world are being negatively impacted financially. Now let's see what this report has to tell us. So the report looks at Australia, Canada, China, Ireland, New Zealand, Singapore, United Kingdom and the United States. And to compare the housing markets, they generate a median multiple, which is the median house price divided by the median household income. And based on the median multiple, the report will give each housing market an affordability rating. For example, if the median multiple is under 3, that market's considered affordable, but then anything between 5 and 9 is considered severely unaffordable. And then this year, for the first time ever, any median multiple above 9 is considered impossibly unaffordable. And I think you can guess the country that meets that category. The most shocking thing about housing affordability in the countries that are being analysed is that just over 30 years ago, almost all of them were extremely affordable. On this graph, the blue bars represent either 1987 or 1992, and you can see that Australia, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, United Kingdom and the United States all had a median multiple of 3 or less. So if the median household income back then was around $20,000, then the median house price was $60,000 or less. How about that for freaking affordable? The red bars show 2019 prior to COVID, and the green bars incorporate the latest results. And wouldn't you know it, Australia has seen the worst deterioration in housing affordability. Canada and New Zealand are also shocking, but New Zealand has improved slightly as house prices have seen a significant decline recently. So people who were fortunate enough to buy houses when they were affordable back in the 1980s and 90s really have no idea what it's like to try and buy a house today. Things that worked for them, like trying to make some sacrifices to save additional income really don't do much when you're trying to buy a house in a developed city where housing affordability is classed as impossibly unaffordable. Because for each $10,000 you might struggle to save, house prices could have gone up 50 or even 100,000. Without parental help or an inheritance, it can be close to impossible. And that's a travesty and a betrayal in my opinion. How could we preside over the deterioration of housing affordability in such a short period of time without taking drastic action to correct course? It's a cheap and nasty way to grow wealth and grow the economy, but ultimately destroys society because property owners benefit greatly while non-property owners get cast aside towards poverty. But when you keep kicking the can down the road, eventually you run out of bloody road. If we look at the home ownership rates, Singapore's way ahead at 88%, most other countries are between 60 and 70%, and Hong Kong's lagging at around 50%. But Singapore's the real standout, and I want to read part of this 2023 quote from the Prime Minister. "We must still ensure public housing is accessible and affordable for Singaporeans of all income groups. We must also keep our housing schemes fair and inclusive for all. This is how we keep our national housing story going strong for current and future generations. This is my government's commitment to you and we will deliver on it." Now, I'm not going to analyze the Singapore housing market, but what a bloody statement and commitment that is. If I was to define the Australian commitment to housing, it would go something like this: if you own property, we'll look after you. But if you don't, you're bloody screwed. The report goes to show there was a general improvement in housing affordability in 2023. But shock horror, that didn't happen in Australia. And just like this image points out, it's extremely difficult to try and figure out what happened. Yes, housing affordability should have also improved in Australia, but the government just couldn't allow those massive house price gains to get even a teeny bit smaller. So countries like Australia and Canada went full Burko and pumped immigration levels so high, it was as if they were afraid of their populations dying out. It would seem that Australia will do anything in its power to keep this housing Ponzi going. But one day they may run out of levers to keep propping up the market. Now we're going to check out the full housing affordability rankings. Looking at the top 10 most affordable, they're all in the US except for Edmonton, Canada. Now remembering that we're measuring the median house price divided by the median household income, seeing places where the median multiple is still in the threes absolutely astounds me. Now these housing markets shaded in yellow are all considered severely unaffordable. Now when we come to the 75th worst housing affordability, we find Perth, Western Australia. Now Perth for a long time has been one of Australia's most affordable cities. This just shows you how bad things have gotten in Australia. Next at number 80, we have Brisbane, Australia with a median multiple of 8.1. Now I think this should actually be a lot higher because Brisbane's median house price has recently overtaken Melbourne's. Then at 83 we have Auckland, which is the only Kiwi city that's covered, and it's showing a median multiple of 8.2. Now let's check out all those cities that are now considered impossibly unaffordable. We've got Toronto, Canada, San Diego, US, Adelaide, Australia, San Francisco, US, Melbourne, Australia, Honolulu, US, Los Angeles, US, San Jose, US. Then the top 3 worst affordability: Vancouver, Canada, Sydney, Australia, and Hong Kong, China. So all Australian cities that are covered are in the worst 20. We have 3 cities in the worst 10. And then we have Sydney, the second worst housing market when it comes to affordability. This is a bloody disgrace and should be sending shockwaves across the entire country. But guess what? Nobody gives a rat's ass because the majority of people own property and they've all basically won the housing lotto. I mean, why even buy lotto tickets anymore when your biggest investment basically doubles in 7 years? I mean, why bother even working? Let's just all quit work and ride the housing gravy train to freedom and fortune. I mean, it doesn't matter that we're locking out millions from ever owning their own home, as long as we're okay. That's all that matters. Now, what about some of the European countries, you might ask? Well, let's check out a comparison. Here we have a 3-bedroom home in Mount Druitt, Sydney. Now, Mount Druitt is 44 kilometers from the Sydney CBD. Now, this 3-bedroom home with a study and a pool recently sold for $1.24 million. Now, let's compare this house with a chateau in France. This 13-room chateau with a pool and manicured lawns has a current price guide of 820,000 euros, which when you convert it to Australian currency is around 1.32 million. So you can either buy a 3-bedroom home in Mount Druitt, which recently topped the list for the highest crime rate, or with the equivalent money, buy a bloody castle in France. Mount Druitt weatherboard, castle. I mean, what more proof of Australia's housing insanity do you need? So if Brisbane was rated based on recent house price gains, Australia would have 4 cities classed as impossibly unaffordable. This is a global embarrassment and complete betrayal to all Australians just wanting to own their own home. I'm Biko Konstantinos.